Humans are funny in that we tend to learn by experiencing first what we don't want before we don't want it, rather than saying this is what I choose and putting our energy in that direction. It doesn't have to be that way, but we had to have 2 global wars before we said no more war. We've had to have Holocaust before we say no more Holocaust. And we've had to have these atrocities before we say no more, rather than choosing to live in honoring all life and all beliefs in a universal sense. There is an awakening of human consciousness that we've never seen before. And where that leads, I think, as we embrace the fact that we are a global family. We may not always like one another, but I believe we truly love one another. And I've seen evidence of that. We may not like the habits of one another every day, but when it comes down to life or death, we will lay our lives on the line for one another. And that's very unique in a species. So I think consciousness, definitely, there is an evolution in consciousness, and that evolution is unfolding. It's not being shared in the mainstream media. You're probably not going to see it on CNN or BBC, but we all know it's there.
Need motivation?
Watch a top 10 with Believe Nation.
Hey, it's Carmichael, and I make these videos because you are probably the most ambitious person in your circle, but you know you're capable of more. And you get that push by surrounding yourself with the best. So today, let's learn from one of the best, Gregg Braden, and my take on his top 10 rules of success. Enjoy. Rule number 2, reprogram your beliefs.
How do we start to reprogram some of our beliefs, Greg?
Well, it's a good question. And, the techniques are beyond what I can offer in 5 or 6 minutes here. It begins with an awareness, allowing ourselves to have an awareness. And for me, it begins with a promise. It begins with a promise to ourselves to be truthful, to be honest, to be factual about who we are, our relationship to our own bodies, our relationship to other people, our relationship to the cosmos, to God or a higher power, our relationship to the earth, our relationship to the past, and our relationship to the future. It's all about relationships. It begins with a promise that we will not lie to ourselves about who we are. And when we are faced with the immutable truths that the new science is revealing, we have no choice. We have 2 choices. We either discount and say we are not going to accept what the science has told us, or when we embrace those deep truths, then we have to relinquish the beliefs that have supported the false narrative of the past. And that's a choice that we all have to make. And I'll just be very honest. Again, what I'm saying to you flies in the face of what I was taught in my formal education through university, I was a corporate scientist in the defense industry, in the energy industry, in the information energy systems. Cisco Systems is my last corporate position. And everything I'm saying to you, it flies in the face of what I was taught in those systems. However, it is supported by the new discoveries. And when the new discoveries tell us that they no longer support the old story, it's time for a new story. And we are living that time right now. What I also know is it takes a lot of work to embrace a new story. It's not easy to change a belief system for anyone. When I was, I think many of your listeners probably know a little bit about me if they're familiar with me. I'm the product of a very dysfunctional family, an abusive alcoholic family. I'm a survivor of childhood trauma. My father, the abuser, left my family when I was 10. And when he left, my mother handed me a book. She said to me, she says, I am not equipped to help you through what it is that you're going to go through. She goes, because I'm hurting too. But she said, I think this book may help you. And it was written in 1929. It was a book by a man, it was a Sufi. And his name was Khalil Gibran. Oh. And the title of the book is called The Prophet.
My favorite.
Yeah, well, each chapter is very brief, but it invites us into deep contemplation of some aspect of our lives. So when I was 10 years old, I read a chapter on work because I had to lie about my age and go to work. We were very poor. I had to go to work in a copper factory is where I ended up because we needed the money. Yeah. And what Khalil Gibran told us about work has been a cornerstone of my life from that moment to this moment. It's on my wall right now. It's on a plaque in front of my computer. There it is right there. and it applies to the work that it takes to change our belief system. This is why I'm bringing it up right now. What Khalil Gibran said is work is love made visible. Work is love made visible. Do we love ourselves enough to put the energy, to put the work into being honest, truthful, and factual with ourselves so that we can become the best version of ourselves possible? Ultimately, it boils down to something that simple. And it can be as complex as we choose to make it. But as a scientist, I have to tell you, life is simple, nature is simple, until we make it complex with symbols and words and mathematics. So it all comes down to love. Do we love ourselves enough to put the energy into being honest with ourselves about who we are? And once we do that, and this is so interesting, I mean, I just have to tell you this. I was with a group of men. I was in a very manly workshop, all males. And some of the men said to me, I'll do this once, but I'll never do it again. And don't you tell anybody, that I'm even going to consider it. And I said, that's beautiful. And here's the reason. I didn't trick him. I was very honest. I said, here's the reason. It's because once you take that first step and you open yourself to that truth, you cannot go back. It's impossible to unsee what you have seen. It's impossible to unknow what has been revealed. You can discount it, but you will never unknow it. And if you're going to live an authentic life of honesty and truthfulness, then you must embrace what it is that you've discovered about yourself. And it just goes on from there. Isn't that beautiful?
Rule number 3, use the power of prayer.
I said, when we see your prayers on the outside, what's happening inside your body? So when we think of Tibetan prayers, we think of the chant, and we think of the mudras and the mantras and the bells and the bowls and the chimes and the incense. We think of all of that. And so I said, when we see all those things, when we see your prayers on the outside, I was interested, what's happening inside? And the man, through the translator, he said to me, you have never seen our prayers because a prayer cannot be seen. He said, what you see are the things that we do to create the feeling inside of our bodies. The feeling is the prayer. The feeling is the prayer. Now, this parallels what science is telling us. We have ceremonies and rituals that are meaningful to us, but this is what's so important. What the abbot said to me was the words are not the prayer. But in the modern world, we in the West have been taught if we say the right words at the right time, something is supposed to happen. And when it does not, sometimes we lose trust and we lose faith. But the words, it's not the words, it's the feeling, the very human experience that has been discounted by the patriarchy, by the male-dominated patriarchy through the ages. The power of human emotion is really where our highest levels of mastery and our deepest levels of power. Women typically are more attuned, not always, but typically are more attuned to their emotions because of their relationship with children and childbirth, their relationship with nature. And men as warriors, it was believed that a man could not be an effective warrior if he was empathizing with his enemy. So his emotions, walk a mile in your enemy's shoes. That doesn't work on the battlefield. So now I personally have found that is not true. I'm a warrior. I've studied martial arts all of my life, and I've studied human emotion all of my life. I'm a double Cancerian male. So Cancerians are all about the power of emotion. And I think emotion is our greatest tool to help us navigate with a different kind of warfare. It doesn't have to be hand-to-hand combat. And in the emotional judo and the emotional kung fu, through the power of our emotions, we often can disarm a potentially violent situation through the understanding of our emotions. And that's a powerful form of warfare.
So without anyone actually being hurt. So it's interesting. You ask about the soul. The soul is.
Does it tune in? Does it tune in?
Well, the soul can be influenced. What the texts tell us is that there's this very interesting relationship between the soul and the body. They cohabit, and the body is a vehicle. They are united in some respects, but the soul is not influenced by those emotions to the degree that the body is. So this is more about bringing the vehicle, the body, into an alignment to free the soul to its deepest and truest levels of expression.
Rule number 4, never limit yourself.
Science is a way of knowing, and it's a relatively recent way of knowing. What we call the scientific method, Jay, it appeared about 300 years ago during the time of Isaac Newton when he formulated the laws of physics, is when we say the scientific method began. Now, other people argue and say, there were scientific approaches that were done in the time of the Greeks and the Romans, and it's true, but it was formalized and structure was given to the scientific method. Science is designed to be constantly updated. It is not a static story. And this, I think, is where the mistake has been made, because we live in a world right now. There's a battle playing out, multiple battles. There's a battle for our thoughts. And you can see that playing out in mainstream media across every nation. It's not just America or just Australia or just Europe or Africa or China. There's a battle for our thoughts. We all know that. There's a battle for our story, the way that we've been taught to think about ourselves. And the stakes have never been higher, because the way that we think about ourselves determines the policies that we embrace, the laws that we agree to live and abide under. Those are all based upon our story. So all of a sudden, you see the battle for our story is front and center. I mean, what could be more important than that right now? So when we talk about that battle, there's a battle for who we are and the way that we think about ourselves. Academia is trying to hang on to what's called the standard model. There's a standard model for the creation of the universe and the creation of humans. We call that the Big Bang, and we call it evolution. The science no longer supports that story, and this is where science is stuck right now. So we ask science to tell us who we are. Science is doing a really good job. And there are scientists that don't like the answers. So there's an attempt being made now to cherry pick the answers. And part of that is that science has been hijacked by corporations. They will cherry pick the information that supports their agenda, and they'll leave the rest behind. Science has been hijacked by corporations, by politics. This certainly is true with the climate change agenda and the climate change conversation. By religion. Science has been hijacked by religion. Science has been hijacked by academia. And there are universities. I'm of the age right now where I have colleagues who have been teaching, they're professors at big universities in Europe and America. They've been teaching 40 to 50 years is how long they've been teaching. And I asked them, why can't you share with your students the new discoveries, the DNA discoveries that overturn the story of evolution as we've come to know it? And what they say to me, they said, Greg, first of all, they say, if I were to teach the new discoveries, it would invalidate my 40 or 50 year career as a professor. And I said, no, it would not. It would actually show your students how relevant science is, because science is made to be constantly updated with new discoveries. It's not static. You cannot teach your students the story you learned in the 1950s, because new discovery, the technology has given us the ability to look into DNA in a way that we couldn't do in the 50s and 60s, to look into the cosmos with telescopes. We couldn't do that in the 50s and 60s. So the science, in large part, and it's very common right now, science has been hijacked. Corporations, politics religion, and academia. So there is a battle going on right now for our story, for our thoughts, for our beliefs, for our story. There's actually, it goes even deeper, and I don't know how deep we can go into this. There's a battle for our very humanness that's playing out, and most people don't even know about it. There is a thinking and an agenda that's being perpetrated that says that humans are frail, weak, powerless, temporary, and that we need something outside of our bodies, computer chips to replace our neurons, chemicals in our blood, wires under our skin, and to perpetuate our species. But what they fail to say is that all of that external technology mimics what we already do in the cells of our body, except our bodies do it better. Yeah. All of the networking is based upon neural networks that we already do, and we do so much better. In the interest of time, I'm beating around the bush. I'm just going to say it. The average human is about 50 trillion cells, give or take. Every one of those cells, 0.07 volts of electrical potential is in every one of those cells. Small potential, but you take 50 trillion times that 0.07 and it's over 350 trillion volts of electrical potential. That's a lot. Every cell in the body functions as a resistor, as a transistor, as a capacitor. Every cell in the body emits photons of light. It receives photons of light. That's information. Every cell in the body, on the external part of the cells, we have receptors that are like antenna receiving information. The genes in our DNA pick up certain wavelengths of light. They are antenna receiving information. And we self-regulate all of this soft technology through our thoughts, feelings, emotions, beliefs, breath, and focus. And that is the core of our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions. And this is what we're coming to terms with now, because there is a movement called the transhuman movement that is telling us that our bodies need to be replaced with machines. Here's the problem, and then I'll stop. The problem with that is once we begin to replace our soft technology, our natural neurons, and the membranes that allow cell potential, ion potentials across the cells, or our crystalline structure of our bones. Once we begin to replace that in one generation, it's the use it or lose it analogy. Pretty soon, the next generation, they lose access to those neurons. They lose access to those capabilities. And the point, and the whole point of the work that I'm doing right now is I'm not saying it's right, wrong, good, or bad. The question is, how much of ourselves do we want to give away to technology? And how can we answer that until we know who we are? And that's the whole point. We are just beginning to understand what it means to be human and the full extent of what our extraordinary potentials are to self-regulate our biology. COVID-19 has brought this front and center with our immune response. That's another conversation, but I'm saying it's up for us all right now. So all of this comes into play when we begin talking about the battle for our story and the role of science. We've got to keep science honest if science is going to serve us. And I think that is of monumental importance right now.
Also, to make sure you're actually taking action after watching this video, I've designed a special free worksheet just for this video. The worksheet will highlight all of the lessons learned in this video, as well as pull out our 3 favorite learnings and quotes that will inspire you to actually do something. The worksheet will also give you space to write down what your key takeaways are and your specific plan of action to make sure you're getting results. If you want the worksheet designed specifically for this video, absolutely for free, there's a link in the description below. Go click on it and start building the momentum in your life and your business. I'll see you there. Rule number 5, recognize emotions.
Men in the Western culture have been taught to deny their emotions, to stuff the emotions, to simply not acknowledge them. I was born and raised in a very conservative community in the Midwest of the United States, northern Missouri. And I come from many people know, from a dysfunctional alcoholic family. I am a survivor of childhood trauma based on that. And in my lifetime, really my lifetime, as men, we were taught that the trauma was all in our mind, is what we taught. It's just the way that you think about things, and to discount the hurt and the emotions. My father left my family when I was 10, and it threw our family into a traumatic experience of sheer survival, of low-income housing, government-subsidized housing, and me leaving school early to work factory jobs in the afternoons because we needed the money. And it was good. I learned a lot from that. But in all of those experiences, I was always taught, and people would just say to me, suck it up. That was the term, suck it up. You're a man, and deal with it. And I did to the best of my ability. But now what I realize as an adult is that it is the very emotion that results from our betrayals, from our hurts, from our fears, that can either be the source of our greatest strength or the source of what destroys us. And Jesus said this in the Nag Hammadi library. He says, if you bring forth that which is within you, it will save you. If you deny that which is within you, it will destroy you. And these are what we are now finding about the emotions. Now we know this is the truth of the emotions that are either resolved and reconciled so that the neuropeptides are allowed to move freely, or unresolved that are stored in the tissues and organs that we associate with our trauma until we either resolve them, or if they are stored long enough unresolved, they will show up as inflammation, as a dysfunction to call our attention to the organ so that we may resolve them. And when we talk about the resolution of emotion chemically, Candace Pert, the Harvard-trained MD that wrote the book Molecules of Emotion, a brilliant work, she actually defined what does it mean to heal. And from a perspective of these neuropeptides that result from unresolved trauma, it is simply allowing them to flow freely in the body and metabolize out of the body. When they metabolize, they come out in breath, urine, perspiration, the way that we typically excrete from the body. So all we're trying to do is to get these chemicals freed and released. And there are a number of ways to do that. Oxygenating the body through breath will do that, breath techniques. And by redefining, giving a different significance to the things that have hurt us in the past. And this is where the heart comes in.
Rule number 6, discover your potential.
The answer to the question, how do we awaken this potential? First, we have to discover what this potential is. And this is where the bulk of my life's journey has led. I'm a scientist. I'm a degreed earth scientist, a strong background in the life sciences. And what I found early on, Amrit, if you ask someone to draw the line, where does science end and spirituality and everyday life begin? The moment you draw that line, you have just fallen into the ancient trap that keeps us stuck in the thinking and the living that has prevented us from embracing the deepest truths of our existence, the deepest truths of our potential. Because what I came to understand as a scientist early in life, back when I was in school back in the 1950s, 1960s, early 1970s. And what I found was that everything I was learning was placed into these boxes. There was a little box that was called geology, and a little box called chemistry, and another one physics, and mathematics and cosmology. Nature doesn't know about those boxes, and neither does our lives. So this is why sometimes academia seems to fail us when we are trying to solve the problems of everyday life, because we have been taught that we are separate from the world around us, that we are separate from ourselves. And this is one of those really beautiful places where science, spirituality, social policy, and everyday life come together in a beautiful way, because the truth is that our ancestors understood our relationship to ourselves and to the world around us on a very deep level. They may not have been scientists as we describe them today, but they definitely understood that we are not what we've been told, and we are so much more than we've ever imagined. And so that led me on the journey to some of the most isolated and remote and pristine and beautiful and mystical and magical places remaining on the earth from the highlands of central China and Tibet, and the monks and the nuns and the abbots and the monasteries, and Nepal and India, certainly, and the Yucatan, and the shamans and the curanderos, and into the Andes Mountains and the Altiplano Bolivia, and all through the desert Southwest, and in the Aboriginal traditions of the great land of Australia, and more. And the bottom line, as different as these traditions are, there is a through line that connects them all. And they all tell us that we arrived on this earth intact with extraordinary potential, where science has asked us to believe that we developed slowly, gradually over a long period of time. Now, this is a very, very different way of thinking. In the new science, this is where the science is just, it's so very cool. We now have the ability to do what used to be science fiction. We can extract the DNA from the fossilized remains of ancient forms of life. Sounds like Jurassic Park.
Yeah, and then resurrect them even.
Jurassic Park was science fiction when it was written. And to the best of my knowledge, we are not resurrecting these forms of life. My mic here. But we now have the ability, we can actually pull the DNA from the bone marrow of the beings that we were taught were our ancestors, that we descended from. And what we've discovered is that we did not evolve slowly, gradually over a long period of time. Neanderthal, we didn't descend from Neanderthal, that we showed up. We appeared on Earth 200,000 years ago. Scientists agree with that. No problem with the date. The question is, where do we come from? How did we get here? And why is it that we haven't changed in 200,000 years? This is not Darwin's idea of evolution. So what the DNA is telling us is that we have the cranial capacity, we've got the neural networks, we've got the physical structure that we arrived with all of the extraordinary capabilities already intact. We were equipped with capabilities light years beyond what we needed in the world to survive 200,000 years ago. And it happened all of a sudden. It did not happen slowly, gradually over this long period of time.
Rule number 7, learn to truly connect.
We have moved to the online streaming and the digital models. I think what we're beginning to understand is that we are more than the photons in the screen of a computer. I'm seeing your photons, you're seeing mine, but we obviously are feeling a connection. And that connection is more than just the pluses and the minuses on the screen. I think this lockdown is teaching us that we are connected and that we can feel the deep love of that connection even when we are no longer able to meet physically. And I'm an optimist. I believe we will be meeting. I'm also a realist. And realistically, we're going through a huge, pivotal, monumental shift in the way we think and the way we live. And when we come out of that shift, I think we will appreciate our connection on an even deeper level.
Rule number 8, let go of the past.
When we talk about the hurts of life, one of the things that I learned very early is that my hurt was directly linked to my perception of the hurt. What I recognized is that the person that I blamed for the hurt did what they felt they needed to do in their lives. And the only way it was possible for me to hurt was to compare what happened in that moment to another moment. And think about this. Because when the moment is all that there is, and there is no past that you're comparing it to, the moment feels very differently. So what I found was that my emotions were very, very closely linked with the expectations and my attachment to my past, whether that past was an hour ago or whether that past was a year ago. Knowing this, I began to experiment with myself and say, what if now is all there is? How would I feel about my partner breaking up with me or my friend betraying me? How would I feel about that? It doesn't change what happens, because we can't always change what happens. We are definitely empowered to change the way we respond to what happens. And if you think about your life, when your heart is broken and when you feel betrayed, it typically is because we are making a comparison between the moment and something in the past. And the question is, what do we use as our frame of reference? What do we use as that point of reference? The same is true with self-esteem. When people say, I'd like to be in better shape, or I'd like to be a better artist, or I'd like to be a better musician. And I understand the intent, and I think it's good to want to improve. But we can only be better. This is really subtle. That's very, very powerful. We can only think that we need to be better when we are comparing what we are now to something else. If we are not making that comparison, all we are is what we are in the moment. And if we have truly done, I'll speak to our viewers, if they have truly done what they believe is their best effort in the moment, then there cannot be anything any better. So I was asked recently about my failures in life. Greg, what are your greatest failures in life? And my answer was not what the interviewer was expecting, because from my perspective, I honestly believe I have no failures in my life. There are many times when the outcome has not been what I thought the outcome was going to be. But what I have chosen to do is, when I go forward with anything in life, if I say yes to an invitation, if I say yes to a commitment, and I'm in 100%, and I do all that I could possibly do given those circumstances in that moment, and I could do nothing else, that's all I could do. And it's impossible for me to fail. Now, the outcome, I may have expectations of an outcome that change, but I've never thought of that as a failure. And I know it's subtle, and it's a very different way of thinking, but it also has freed me from the polarity of the success-failure paradigm and allowed me to move forward with new choices in my life. And I continue. I'm a student. I am a student of understanding myself, my relationship to the world, and I continue to do these things.
Rule number 9, study the universe.
One of the hallmarks of a dysfunctional alcoholic family is tremendous criticism and the lack of a spiritual connection to anything. So I was not raised in any particular faith. My explorations as I began studying, as a child, I was studying ancient civilizations, ancient technologies, and books. And the moment I had the money to go to some of these places, I began not only to experience the archaeological legacies, but the spiritual traditions of the people. So whether I was with the Bedouins in Egypt, which was my first trip, or it led me into the Andes Mountains of southern Peru, and the shamans and the curanderos and the mystics, and into the Yucatan of Mexico and the shamans and the healers, and into the monks and nuns in Tibet and Nepal and India, and all through the American desert Southwest, and then in Australia into the Aboriginal traditions, and into Africa. What I found was that our global family has memories, and we have stories that help us to embrace what we experience in our lives, hopefully in a healthy way. And as different as they all are from one another, there are common threads. And that common thread is that we are the product of an intentional act rather than the result of random mutations and random processes. Now, as a scientist, I was taught that we are the product, that we live in a dead, inert universe, the product of the Big Bang, that we are the product of lucky biology, and that competition, conflict, and struggle is what has given us the power to prevail over other forms of life. That's my teaching as a geologist. What I have to say is that the indigenous wisdom ran counter to that. And then that led me into the science. And I've got to tell you, honest to God, the best science of the modern world has overturned what I was taught when I was in school. The best science of the modern world tells us that we are not the product of evolution as we've been led to believe. So I want to be very, very clear with our viewers. I am a geologist. I believe in evolution. It's a fact. I've seen it in the fossil record for many forms of life, plants, animals, insects. That theory breaks down when it comes to humans. And the new DNA science is what's really causing the ripples in the scientific community, because when we compare our DNA today, we now have the ability to extract the DNA from the fossilized remains of beings that we used to think we descended from. And when we do that and compare our DNA to theirs, we find that we did not descend from those beings, that we appeared on Earth 200,000 years ago. Scientists agree with the date as what are called anatomically modern humans, and we haven't changed. We have not changed in 200,000 physically. We have the same nervous system. We have the same body proportions, same cranial capacity. I believe that we have evolved consciously. I think consciousness definitely has evolved. But what it says, and when you really get into the deep science of the universe itself and our relationship to the universe, the odds of us being the product of a random process are just infinitesimal. Sir Fred Hoyle, the British astrophysicist, said the odds of our DNA forming from random processes are the equivalent of a tornado moving through a junkyard and leaving a fully assembled Boeing 747 in its wake. And we know that's not going to happen. So what the new science, the bottom line, the new science is telling us that we live in a universe that is alive and conscious. It is not dead and inert, where we would expect to see life in many forms, in many ways, where everything is connected, and that we as physical beings are the product of, and I have to say this as a scientist, we are the product of some form of intervention has happened in the past to bring us to the point that we are today.
And rule number 10, the last one before some very special bonus clips, is be an optimist.
The vision that we have for ourselves, the vision that you see for potentially what's emerging at this crossroads, when you hear inspired evolution, what does inspired evolution mean to you?
Well, I will be very honest. I'm an optimist. And I'm also a realist. And I am optimistic about our world and our future in the long term. Realistically, we're going to go through some turmoil to get to that world, because I'm just going to invite our listeners just to consider this. And I'm going to speak directly to them. Do you know what a powerful being it takes to live in the world that we are living in right now, where we are seeing and experiencing the collapse of everything that we have been taught to trust and depend upon, that was built upon quicksand in the past? To let that world go without having the certainty of what comes next already in place. You know what a powerful being that takes. And that's precisely where we are right now. And all we have is ourselves. And ultimately, that's all we need. Because when we recognize the power and the mastery that's available within us, that has been with us from the moment we appeared on Earth 200,000 years ago, what it says, we are evolving. And I believe we are evolving in consciousness. Our body may not have changed, but we are definitely evolving in consciousness. And it means I'm a musician as well as a scientist, so I'm going to use my musician's poetry here. It means that we are the artists as well as the art. We are the artists designing what we are about to live is the art of our society, of our communities that are evolving right now. So inspired evolution is, to me, when I hear the word inspired evolution, it says to me that I'm part of the process and I am an architect of the process rather than experiencing it as something happening to me. I went to my first rock concert, Jefferson Airplane, the original Jefferson Airplane. And what I saw, Rob, I'd never seen anything like this. I saw this group of people on a stage influence the way that in that venue was about 30,000 people. So they influenced the way that those 30,000 people were feeling in their lives. That group of people had the ability to shift the emotion and the feeling inside of the people that were in that room. And I recognize that, but I also recognize that when the concert was over, when we left, we went outside, that feeling began to wane very quickly, and the people needed something outside of themselves to create that feeling again. In that time, they were vinyl records and cassette tapes. They needed to have something to respond to for them to have the experience. Well, in the same year, I also had the opportunity to see it was an event in a stadium with about 70,000 seats and a speaker named Billy Graham. And it was a religious oriented talk, and I have to say honestly, I wasn't totally into everything that was being said, but what I saw was a stadium of 70,000 people, and they were being moved on a deep level by the words of one man on the pitcher's mound in this outdoor stadium. It was at the Kansas City Athletic Stadium, the A's Stadium in Kansas City, Missouri. But here's the difference. When we left, they did not need something outside of themselves to maintain that feeling, because his words had changed the way they felt about themselves and their relationship to the cosmos, to God, to one another, to the earth, to their communities. And it stayed with them because they were changed in the presence of his words. And I recognized both those at an early age, and I thought there's got to be a way to combine these two, to the music and the sound. I'm still searching for that. But the science gives us a reason to think differently about ourselves, and it's based on honest, truthful, factual information, if it's good science. And from that, we begin to think of ourselves differently, and we are changed in the presence of new understandings. It all comes down to our story. What we're talking about is our story. It doesn't have to be technical, but our story, our lives literally are based upon our story. We solve our problems, we choose our relationships, we heal our bodies, we choose our politics, we build our society, all based upon the way we've been taught to think about ourselves. And what's happening right now, and I think we all know this, is our story is changing. And there is a battle, Rob. There's a battle for our story. There's a battle for our thoughts, for our beliefs. There's a battle for our very humanness that is unfolding, and it's happening right in front of us. Many people don't recognize it because it is compartmentalized, but it is happening right now on the mainstream of the world stage. So I go back to those experiences as a scientist today through the eyes of what I now know. And I know that the most fundamental act, the most radical act of empowerment that any of us can embrace is to honor the deep truth of our story. Not the story necessarily that we've been coerced into accepting or believing, not the story maybe that came from our family or our religion or our education, academia or our political affiliations, but the true story of our relationship with ourselves, with the world around us, with one another, with the past, with the future, with the cosmos, and if we believe in a higher power. And in the presence of that story, we are changed, and that gives new significance to what's unfolding in our lives. It's a celebration that moves us from the fear into the freedom of self-mastery. And the science is now telling us literally the self-regulation of our own biology. What could be more powerful than to be able to self-regulate, upregulate and downregulate genes, to enhance your immune response on demand, to awaken longevity enzymes on demand, to create resilience to a changing world on demand, deep states of intuition, and so much more. What could be more powerful than to awaken to that possibility now in the presence of a world that's changing faster than we can document it in our textbooks? So it's a long answer to a short question, but the science for me, I recognized at an early age that it was a language that would help me personally to understand my relationship to the world that I was drawn to, and it comforted me in times of extremes. And I think that's true for all of us today. When the world begins to change, there's a fear. And in that fear, people, communities, societies, governments, nations will try to cling to an image and an idea of the familiar world of the past.
Yeah.
We can't go back to that world because it doesn't exist. That world is gone. And this is where the suffering comes from, because we're trying to apply the way we've been taught to deal with the past. All right, we're trying to apply that in a new world, but the new world doesn't work like the world of the past.
Yeah.
So we need new ways of thinking, new ways of living, and it comes down to something very simple. Two things. The most simple is about love. The bottom line, do we love ourselves enough to live our lives in a way that gives our bodies what they need to do what they know how to do really well? Do we love ourselves enough to live and to think in a way that allows the best version of ourselves and the best versions of our families and communities to come forward? And the science tells us how to do that. Science is telling us what we need to do to self-regulate our immune system. And it's all the things we already know: diet, exercise, nutrition. But there are new discoveries in terms of diet, new discoveries in terms of exercise and nutrition. I mean, just for example, when I was back in my 30s, 40s, and 50s, back in those days, I was taught that steady state exercise was the key. So you go out and you'd run a half marathon, or you run on the treadmill for an hour, or whatever it is. Now we know that may not be the optimum form of exercise. Yeah. For a lot of people. What now, the human body is built for what's called HIIT, high intensity interval training. Mm-hmm. That's our biology is based upon that. When we optimize our biology, that's about hormone balance. It's about testosterone in men and women, estrogen in men and women, DHEA levels, and all of those things. We know that we have a new class of stem cells has just been discovered. We used to think that people lose stem cells as they age, and we now know that you can be 100 years old and have access to stem cells. Maybe not as easy, but they didn't disappear. It's how you get to them. And nutrition and movement are keys to doing this. So do we love ourselves enough to give our bodies what they need to do what they are made to do? And when we begin to embrace that mastery, all of a sudden change looks a lot less scary.
Yeah.
When we become the best versions of ourselves, we fear the outer world, that change, less. We fear one another less. And perhaps most importantly, we fear our own power. We are extraordinarily powerful beings, and we're taught to discount and deny that power. Yeah. And in our powerlessness, this is what's happening in the world right now. There's a lot of hurt in the world for a lot of reasons. We typically are not taught how to heal that hurt. So what happens is the hurt needs to be expressed, and it's expressed as fear, and it's expressed as hate. Unresolved hurt becomes the fear and the hate in the world, and we're seeing a world of hurt. When we begin to resolve the hurt that we have within us, with a lot of reasons. We're all experiencing loss. We're mourning the loss of a way of life. Every one of us has lost something.
Yeah.
We've lost freedoms. We've lost family members. We've lost jobs and careers. If you don't know how to heal that, there's a lot of hurt that comes with that. And that hurt can be expressed as fear for what the unknown, and as hate for those that represent something other than what we're familiar with. So all of this is up for us right now. And the science is giving us the tools that allow us to transcend, not just survive, but to transcend. But to do it, we've got to let go of the old ways of thinking. And I think that's probably the hardest thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we just covered a lot of ground there, didn't we?
A lot. That was amazing. Wow. Thank you for saying all those things.
Thank you so much, Greg. Sorry about that, Emilio.
So, well, let me ask you guys. I don't know what your ages are. I'm closer to 70 than I am to 60 right now. And I think you all probably represent a very different generation.
How old do I look? Let's say I shaved yesterday.
To me, you guys look ageless. You're my brothers. You look ageless. I don't even think about an age when I see you. But I know that we're probably talking about different generations. So let me ask you. It's your program, but I'm just going to ask you, how does your community see the people that you associate with in your community? How do they feel about what's happening in the world?
I think it's a lot of mixed emotions. I mean, as you said, there's a convergence of cycles. So there's the cycle of the climate. For that, in that area, I think our generation is extremely moving forward. A lot of their purpose, a lot of their conscious and energies is towards helping that. There's also the cycle of innovative technologies, as you said, right? And that's a difficult one. I saw one of your interviews talking about the neural link with Elon Musk. That's one of those things where you never know what can happen with that. And it can be such a transformation in our humanity. So there's so much that, I mean, to answer your question, there's mixed emotions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and this is the key. This is the key. How can we solve the problems if we're not honest with ourselves about the problems? And that, I think, is probably the biggest hurdle, because there are so many competing agendas that are out there right now. So many competing agendas. Climate is I've been talking about climate as a geologist. I love to talk about climate.
Yeah.
Because I was studying this back in the 70s, when I was in the corporations. The idea of love means different things to different people. And that's where the answer is yes. We do need to have that. And this is why I say, even before COVID, this was happening. We, as a society, and in some cases as a planet, as a global society, we were already primed for the fear, are part of a very dangerous game and an ancient trap where we are taught to hate and fear the things that prevent the world from moving in one direction or another. So we had the 1% and the 99%, and the inequities, and it taught people to hate prosperity and wealth. And we have men against women, and we've got Muslims against Christians, and Jews against Muslims, and we've got blacks against whites, and Hispanics against whites, and Asians against whites. And if you step back and look, it's about every 6 months or so, there's a new division that is introduced, and it's supported in the mainstream. And I'm not saying that there aren't problems. We got a lot of problems, but we've always been able to work those problems out in our societies and our communities. But when people are influenced through media, and there is a lot of influence. I remember when I was a kid, when I went to that Jefferson Airplane concert back in the old days, we had 3 television stations. And they were actually news, ABC, CBS, and NBC. And they were news stations. And the broadcasters would, as objectively as they could, they would inform us as to what had happened without showing any emotion. They tried not to, or showing any favoritism in one way or another. And I remember the exception. I remember when Walter Cronkite, I was in school, I was in grade school when Walter Cronkite announced the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And they let schools out, and we all went home and watched in horror the events that were unfolding. And it's the first time I'd seen a news broadcaster cry. He cried, he took off his glasses, and he held his hands in his eyes, and he cried, which was very atypical for a news broadcaster. And we've come so far from that. We don't get news anymore. What we have are opinions. And the opinions are, for whatever reasons, they are dividing us as a nation. But it goes so deep. It's actually dividing us, the very fabric of our families. It's tearing our families apart. I know right now I have friends who I've never had any children. I've never been blessed with children. I think I'd be a good dad. It just never happened. But I have friends that are. And even at the dinner table with their kids in high school and college, who get their information from one source in social media, and the parents are getting their information from another source, it's very, very different information, and it clashes so much at the dinner table, some of them cannot even complete the meal. There's so much hurt and so much anger. And what you're saying, Rob, is historically, it's a very old game, and it's being used now because it works. When you can keep a population divided, there is no, it's hard to have common shared values and common shared opinions. And this is what's happening to America right now. The very fabric of America is the family unit, the values, the history, the culture is all under attack. And as we give in to that division, what happens is our society becomes ripe for a new way of thinking and a new way of living to sweep in, and it happens before you know it. So is it right, wrong, good, or bad? I'm not going to say that here. I'm saying it's important that we be aware and not fall into the dangerous game that's dividing us from our friends, our families, our communities, our society, dividing us between nations. Because at the end of the day, we're just people. And at the end of the day, we all want this. We've heard this. We all want the same things for ourselves and for our children. And we have a pretty good idea of what that is. So it's an awareness. And I think the most fundamental, the most radical act that any of us could do is to do what you've done. Turn off the external noise, that distortion, and think for ourselves. And you look around and ask yourself, are these things really happening? And if they are, make changes where changes need to be made, but do it from a place of kindness rather than from a place of hate. There's so much hurt in our world right now, and we all are hurting, and we're all mourning loss. Every person on this planet has lost something. We've either lost loved ones and friends. I lost my mom to COVID right at the end of the year. So we've all lost. And if people haven't lost loved ones or friends, we have lost a way of life. So there's something, we are all in mourning, whether we recognize it or not. And if we don't have the tools to address that mourning, what happens is our deep hurt is expressed as hate. And you're seeing that hate in the world today. And so this comes back to the beginning of this conversation. I have people say something similar to me all the time. I don't have time to understand myself because I'm trying to put food on my table and feed my family, or I'm trying to do my best in school. And those, I understand all of that. Here's the thing. We have been conditioned to live in a world through a way of thinking that has served us in the past. And we have to say it served us because you and I are here now, so it worked well enough to get us here. That way of thinking worked in the world the way it used to be. The world just changed, and nobody told us. There was no special on CNN, or the Discovery Channel. Hey, the world changed. I wish there was. So we've never been given the opportunity to even mourn the passing of the world that no longer exists. So we're trying to solve our problems and think about ourselves the way we always have in a world that changed, and it doesn't fit. It no longer fits. So yes, we've got all these little things going on, but what I've found in my own life personally, if I can back up and shift the paradigm, and I'll tell you what I mean by that, but if I can shift the paradigm within which I'm seeing everything, all of a sudden all those little things take on a whole new meaning, and they become a lot less of a problem. They become much easier. The paradigm is this. We have been conditioned, steeped in a story of who we are that is based in separation, competition, and conflict. It began in 1859. And people say to me, Greg, 1859, it was over 100 years ago, 150 years ago. So what? It's a good question. What difference does that make? It's a good question. Here's the answer. The world we live in, the society, the economic system, the corporations, the medical model, the way that we're taught to provide for our families, the way that we are taught to have the most intimate relationships under the roof with the people that we share our homes and even our bed with. Let's just get real. We are taught to interact with humans based upon these ideas of competition, conflict, and separation. And even the most spiritually minded people that say, I've transcended that, when they are in a heated discussion and somebody pushes their buttons, they go to that lowest common denominator often of competition. They will lash out with something really hurtful to defend themselves. It's not their fault. It's deeply ingrained in our subconscious. So not if, because it's already happening, as we back off and embrace the new paradigm of cooperation and mutual aid, that is huge. It is a hugely different way of thinking. It means we live in a world that likes us. where nature is not out to snuff out every good thing that happens to us. It means we don't have to be constantly vigilant in defending ourselves from the world around us. That is a hugely, vastly different way of thinking. And we have an opportunity now to begin with an entire generation of young people who now are steeped in the glamour of war, conflict, and competition to make that shift. What would it look like to have a world where we have an entire generation of young people that know that nature likes them and that we live in a world of cooperation and mutual aid and connection? We're about to find out. We don't have to wait long to find out. So for me, simply backing up out of the minutia momentarily to look at the big picture and to make that shift, and once we make that shift, when you go back into the minutia, everything looks different to me. When it comes to an affirmation, affirmations can be powerful, and for some people they're not. And a lot of people say, well, you know, if the affirmation is so powerful, how come I'm not experiencing the effect? What scientists tell us is the average human speaks to themselves, consciously or unconsciously. We have thoughts spinning around in our brain, about 60 to 80,000 thoughts per day. Some of those thoughts are the words to the songs, and they are the affirmations. The neuroscientist Andrew Newberg tells us, Newberg is his name, I'm sorry, in his work that a single word has the power to change the genes that create stress or relieve stress in our lives. He's telling us that something within us has the ability to shift to the very core of our expression. So we know that words are powerful. The key to a successful affirmation is that we must communicate with the subconscious part of our mind, number one. Number two, we must communicate in the language that the subconscious recognizes. And this is where, you can say, I had a friend of mine when I was working in the corporations that had affirmations all over his office, all over his computer screen. They were on little Post-it notes in the car. We would carpool in. You know, my perfect mate is manifesting for me now. My perfect mate is manifesting for me now. That was his affirmation. And I said, do you say these things? He goes, oh man, I say them about 1 million times a day. I said, do they work for you? He says, nah. You know, these things don't work. And I said, well, why do you think they don't work? And he said, look at me. He says, I'm an engineer. I'm a slob. He said, I wear the same clothes to work 3 out of 5 days during the week, you know, and the bottom line, by the time he finished describing himself to me, even he didn't believe that he was worthy of his perfect mate manifesting for him now. So he was saying the words, but he was not, there was the underlying emotion. And what he was actually feeding into his system was counter to what those words were saying. So it's not enough to say the words. When we go into our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions, those words are what become the prayers. And for many people, and I know you've heard this as well, a lot of people feel that prayer is broken, that the world doesn't work today the way it worked in biblical times, that we have lost our power and that we have no ability to communicate with a greater power, with God, with the forces around us. And it's largely because the secrets, the deep truth of our relationship, the fundamental physics of our relationship to our world have been minced and parceled and in many cases deleted from the texts, leaving us with a sense that we are essentially powerless beings. And if you are powerless, then you are a victim. And if you're a victim, you need a savior. And that savior is coming to us on a silver plate in terms of technology, in terms of political leaders. I will save you if you just do these things. And this is why I say I think one of the most powerful acts and the most radical act we can do is to think for ourselves original thinking based upon the deep truth of our relationship to our bodies and the earth, not based upon the false assumptions of obsolete science that permeate our academic world right now. It's one of the reasons I left academia. It's one of the reasons many of my colleagues who are in this genre, who are very well-respected scientists, have left academia because they were not allowed to share with students and in their writings and their papers what they had found in their research that reflects a very different reality. So for me, it's good news. It's a beautiful message of hope and possibility as a sovereign biological being. For a system that's based on centralized power and control, it's probably the worst news they could imagine, because it means we don't need the centralized power and control. I think ultimately we're all better off by embracing our own power because it frees us from the fear of a changing world. And we all know my world is changing, your world is changing. Boy, is it ever. Faster than we can document it in our classrooms and textbooks. But the change isn't necessarily bad until we compare it to what we've known in the past, and this is where the fear comes in. So the new discoveries helping us to understand we are part of rather than separate from our world. And this is where the affirmations come in. So I was at the CERN superconducting supercollider in Geneva, Switzerland, where the physics experiments that are revealing what happened moments after our universe began. They recreate the beginning of our universe, and then they're able to document what happened then to create the laws of physics that we are experiencing, that we're living under right now. And what they announced in 2012 is that there is in fact a field, an intelligent field of energy. It's a subtle energy that underlies all of creation. Before then, it was a metaphor, or a lot of people felt like it was a new age concept. We are all one. Everything is connected. Or an indigenous. A lot of indigenous elders talk about this. Here's where they got stuck. And I've gone to scientific conferences where they'll take their hands and they'll say, "Oh yeah, that's no longer controversial. There is a field. There's a field out there that connects all things." And their hands go like this. There's a field out there that connects all things, because subconsciously they're still saying we're separate from that field.
Right.
But here's what the science is showing us, and this was a game changer for me, just a mind blower, that every atom in every molecule and every cell of our bodies in this very instant, so it's not like it's about to happen, it's happening right now. Every atom is constantly emerging and collapsing into that field. And what that says to us is that we are the field. It's not the fields out there. We literally are wrinkles. We are disturbances in this field, this body that is held in place by a conscious awareness as long as I'm breathing on this earth. I am a disturbance. I'm a localized wrinkle in that field. And what that means is that if I want to bring about change in my world, I don't have to force a change out there. I become that change. And as I have become that change, the field is now reflecting what it is because I'm part of the field. So it's a subtle, but it's a very powerful way, very different way of thinking. You're not imposing change on the world around you. You are becoming the change. So you're becoming the abundance. You're becoming the love, the gratitude, the care, the healing. You're becoming those things, and that is very different. We're conditioned to ask for them, to plead for them, because we're led to feel powerless in our lives, when in fact there are modalities of ancient prayer that were edited from the religious texts in the 4th century by the church. They took out the information helping us to understand this deep relationship, leaving us powerless. And affirmations are essentially a form of prayer, or prayer is a form of affirmation, however you want to look at it, where we are communicating. And I want to be really clear, it's not about control, it's not about manipulation, it's not about imposing our will, it's about participating in the way that this field unfolds and expresses in our lives. And when you really begin to get that shift, it's subtle and it's powerful. It's not making something happen out there. And that means you can't blame what's out there for your experiences. I come from a very dysfunctional, broken family, and I had to make a choice early in life as to whether or not I would, and community, as to whether or not I would allow that to define my experience, to define my existence. Other people around me had the same experience, and they made very different choices. They today continue to blame their environment, their parents, their family, their upbringing for the sad and unfortunate things in their lives, and that's a path. Mm-hmm. It's not right, wrong, good, or bad, but we have a choice to make another path. And when we began as a scientist, beginning to understand these relationships gave me the reason to think differently. And it also gave me the reason to test in my life if those thoughts are really true or not, what works and what doesn't. We covered a lot of ground, and for some people, they've heard it before. For some people, it may be new. We're talking about the scientific way of interpreting and understanding what already exists. And whether we're in a simulation or not, whether this is a virtual reality or not, we're here. And we're here learning something. And I think the best that we can do is to be honest, truthful, and factual with ourselves when it comes to who we are and what our potential is, and to take that information to become the best version of ourselves in our lives and create the best world possible, because we are in this world. And whatever it is that we're here to learn, I think this is the path to the learning. I know so many people, and you probably do as well, who have had such painful lives, Danica, that they will make the search to understand who they are the diversion in their lives. And by diverting from the reality of everyday life, they miss life itself. And I believe that life is here. The beauty of this world, this is such, we take it for granted. The colors and the sky and just water and the way water works and music and our ability to create these vibrations that move our soul. You know, this is what life's all about. So I just want to invite everyone. I think it's good to entertain deeper understandings and to use science as a language, but when it comes right down to it, it's about you and me in everyday life, being the best people we can be, and finding the joy that really makes our soul sing, because I think that's our compass. That's how we know when we're on the right path. Every one of us in our own lives, we have to develop what I call the spiritual anchor, the rock, the soul compass, and it has nothing to do with religion. When I say the spiritual anchor, the spiritual anchor is when we know who we are in relationship to ourselves. We know who we are in relationship to the earth, to one another, to our past, to our future. We know how we are empowered and what our potential is. And once you know that, we then can live our truth in a world whether other people support it or not. When we depend on other people for that support, that's where we give our power away. And that's where many of us come from. I'll just say to the young people listening, I come from a very difficult family background, dysfunctional alcoholic family, full of criticism, instilling self-doubt in the young people. I have a younger brother. We came from the same family and we had the same criticisms. I didn't believe what my father told me about my inability in life. And my younger brother, he did believe it. He embraced much of it. And it's so interesting. Two different people, the same family, same background, interpreting the information differently. And I attribute my ability to let that criticism roll off of me in the blessing I had very early on. I knew who I was, and I understood my place in this world at an early age. Not everyone has that, but I began looking at an early age. You know, it takes a lot of work to explore the potential within every one of us. What would it mean to have a generation of young people from the moment they begin in school, in kindergarten, from the moment they begin to understand their relationship to the world and the kids around them, to think in terms of cooperation and working together, In other words, what can I offer? What can I give? What can I share? How can I contribute? Which is very different from what we're led to believe of what can I get? What's in it for me? How do I benefit? All right. And we are all steeped in this story. So our economic model that's struggling is based in the false assumptions of competition and conflict. Our corporate model is based in
everything.
Everything. So it's
everything.
up for us right now. So this right now, we're living this rare convergence of the cycles that have changed the world as we have known it. And the new world that's emerging, the struggle and the suffering comes from us trying to embrace that world through the old thinking of false assumptions of an obsolete science. Now, we've asked science to tell us who we are. And science has done a really good job. There are a lot of scientists that don't like the answer.
Yeah.
Science has been hijacked by corporations. They cherry pick the data. By politics, they cherry pick the data. Climate change is a perfect example of how that's happening. Science has been hijacked by corporations, by politics, by religion, and by academia for reasons of money and power and ego and habit. And this is where we find ourselves now. And I believe that we're witnessing the breakdown of these old structures, these old ways of thinking, because we're living in a new world. And then I'll stop here. It takes one generation. One generation has to be the generation that lives the old world that is crumbling and also lives the new world that's not quite fully developed yet. So you're living in between these two worlds, and it takes a really strong person or a strong family or a strong community or a strong nation or a strong planet to live in this in-between time without getting lost in the fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
This is where the new human story comes in, because the new science is giving us the reasons not to fear. We are holistic beings living in a holistic universe, part of all that is, and that is the fallacy for the way that we try to approach so many of our problems, the fallacy that we are somehow separate from one another, separate from our world, and powerless victims of our environment. And I think one of the things that's happening right now, Danica, if you're going to have a global pandemic, it's good to have it in the age of the internet, because the internet has allowed us to stay connected, and it's allowed us to access information in ways that we never have in the past. And part of that access, I think, is the answer to the question that you just asked. So I'm going to begin the answer by simply saying there's a battle that is unfolding in our world right now on multiple levels, right in front of our eyes. We all know there's a battle for our thoughts. That's very obvious. The media is battling to inform and guide the way that we think about ourselves and our relationship to the world, and how we respond to the pandemic and the economy and race and all the other things that are up for us right now. There's that battle. But that battle is based upon a battle for our beliefs. And that battle is playing out in academia. It's playing out with what we teach our kids about who they are and the way that they solve the problems of the world that come to them from the time that they're very young. The battle for our beliefs. Where did we come from? Are we an accident of lucky biology, or is there some intentionality underlying our existence? I mean, that's a huge question. Is the universe dead and unconscious and inert, or is the universe alive and intelligent and connected? That battle is playing out. There's a battle for our bodies, and I think we're all getting that. What does it take to get healthy? What's it take to stay healthy? What do we have to give our babies within moments of when they emerge from the womb, when they come into this world? We are conditioned to think that they have to have something outside of themselves in order to survive. All those battles are playing out, but I want to tell you, they're all static. They're noise, and they're covering what I believe is the deepest battle of our time. Danica, it's a battle for our very humanness. Our very humanness is on the line right now, Because for the first time in recorded human history, we have the technology that can steal our humanness from us in ways that some people aren't even aware of, and other societies and cultures are adopting very, very quickly. And I'm talking about computer chips implanted into the human brain and chemicals injected into the body and wires under the skin. And the problem with this technology that's moving so fast is that when we give our natural humanness away, when we give away our biological potential to technology, our body begins to atrophy with respect to those potentials. So if we're implanting chips in our brain, our neurons, we've all heard this before, use it or lose it. Biology, you hear this all the time. Our neurons begin to think they're not needed anymore, and so they stop producing. In one generation, the next generation, they become an appendage of something that used to be, and we're not using them anymore. And for the first time in 5,000 years of recorded human history, the technology has the power to forever change our species. And the question, and this, I'm laying the foundation to answer the question that you asked. The question is, and I would never tell anyone or try to convince or persuade anyone to or not to use the technology, but here's the key. The key is, how much of ourselves do we want to give away to the technology and lose forever? We can't answer that until we know who we are. And that brings us back to the very first question that you asked. And I got to tell you, it's where the scientific discoveries are coming so fast and furious in these obscure technical journals that very few people get to see, but they're based upon peer-reviewed science, and they're writing a new human story. And that new human story is what the COVID pandemic is pushing us to understand. There was a very famous author and prophet early in the 20th century. His name is Khalil Gibran. And I began reading Khalil Gibran when I was 8 years old. In Khalil Gibran, there is one sentence that has been my sole compass. It has been with me. I think of it every day. I apply it in every situation, every relationship, every job, every commitment. What he said is, work is love made visible. It takes a lot of work to know who we are in this world and to demonstrate for ourselves our potential. That is our love made visible. That is us loving ourselves in a way that empowers us to be in this world in a healthy way where we thrive in the presence of all of the changes. So my invitation for any young people is love yourself. And your love made visible is you taking the time to understand your potential and who you really are. The good news is we have that information now. New discoveries, new science, indigenous wisdom married together. I think we owe it to ourselves to bring it all to bear in our lives today.
Because you made it this far in a video, I want to celebrate you. Most people start and don't finish. Most people never actually follow through. Most people say they want something, but they don't ever do the work to actually get it. But you are different. You are special. Believe Nation, you made it here all the way to the end, and I love you. So as a special celebration, if you put a hashtag believe down in the comments below on this video, I will showcase you and celebrate you somewhere on the screen in a future video because you are awesome. For 10 more amazing rules from Bruce Lipton, check the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.